Okay. So today we have a really, really exciting next step in our AI on-ramp series, which is just getting started. We had about 3 weeks ago an initial discussion of the resources that are available for you as faculty at JSU. If you were not there or you didn't get the link, I'll drop it into the chat a couple of times. There is a link to a Canvas course that's called our AI Infusion course. And what it allows us to do is to sort of introduce to you this vast number of resources, one little step at a time. So you go into the AI Infusion course, you look around, there's an AI readiness survey to kind of tell you where you should start, and it will link you to some resources. And when you're ready, we also have a huge number of pre-prepared modules created by Intel and provided to Jackson State by the Mississippi AI Network. And those modules can be incorporated into your classwork, and we're happy to work with you to help you figure out how to do that. And in fact, that's what today is kind of about, some of those modules. And we're not, while those are great resources, they're just kind of a seed for how you can build in your own discipline on all of these different ways of thinking about AI. And so with that, I am going to stop with the intro. Hopefully, as people come in, they'll be able to catch up with what we're doing. I want to reintroduce to you our colleague, Dr. Brittany Myburgh from the Department of Art. And whether she likes it or not, the JSU AI whiz kid. So if you want to know about all the different things going on in the AI universe in higher ed, she is one of our best resources. So Dr. Myburgh, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. I am really excited about this particular subject. And so, like Dr. Pizzetta said, this is in relation to one of the specific modules that are available via Intel in our AI sandbox. And so module 13 is a module on design thinking as it relates to AI applications and how we teach students how to both critique them and build them. And so I thought today what we'll do is we'll sort of do a walkthrough of what is in that module, what design thinking is, and how we can also extend what's in that module to make it even more relevant and applicable for our students. So design thinking is something that tries to take a really systematic approach to formulate improved research questions. And so design thinking as a methodology is something that is applicable both to AI, but also outside of AI. And so I find it particularly fruitful when I'm trying to get students to brainstorm, and especially to brainstorm good research questions. So if we think about traditional research, we're often thinking about, well, we start with the literature review, we find out what's out there, what is available. We might identify a problem or a gap within that literature, and then we might start to either collect data if we're in STEM, or sort of do our qualitative analysis if we're in the humanities. Design thinking is often looking at research for building perhaps a product or a process or a design outcome. And so it really helps us to center people. So design thinking, instead of a literature review, you start with people, you start with interviews, and you can think about that as qualitative analysis. And you're uncovering needs and then developing testable prototypes where you're constantly then iterating on those prototypes based on feedback. So it's another kind of methodology or pathway. The reason it's really, really good for encouraging students to think about AI is because it really lets them interrogate whether the application of AI is ethical, whether it is meeting the needs of people, whether it's meeting the needs of a community. So not just solving for some kind of tech problem, but how is their human-centered design involved? So we're going to look at design thinking. We're going to talk about the different stages. There are 5 stages. We're going to look at how we might think about encouraging students to critique existing AI applications or to build their own. And hopefully we'll come up with an activity that we could take into the classroom. I do have this question to begin with so that I'm not just kind of talking at you. So my question is, how do your students currently learn to do research, and where do they struggle the most? How do we currently teach them how to research in the classroom or for an assignment? And I have the chat open if we want to contribute there or out loud. This is my question for you. Let me know what you think. We've got a quiet group today. So I can give you an example in my classroom when we're doing, say, like an art history research essay. It's very much instructing them to go out and find sources, right? That seems to be the go-to. Okay, I need you to write a research essay. Go out and find sources and do that by, doing your library search on your keywords or your topics. And I find that students can really, really struggle with that. They can also struggle with understanding the difference between a primary source and a secondary source, for example. So getting students to figure out how and where to do research can be a struggle. With design thinking, where they would start is with people and by asking people questions. And so before they even jump into doing like a literature review, they would start with this sort of observational phase. This is a diagram that is an updated version of the design thinking model. It's called the double diamond of design thinking. This is a little bit different to what is in the Intel module, and so I'll make this one available as well. But essentially what is happening is that students are looking to create a sense of empathy or study empathetic research with a particular demographic or group of people, or say users of an application, to then be able to find the right problem. So instead of starting with the problem and going and doing a literature review, you start with people first. You can converge back then into a problem statement. What it really stresses is this iterative process. Oops, jumped ahead there. So there are these 5 interconnected stages. We have empathize, define, ideate, prototype, test. And this can expand traditional academic inquiry, and each stage there's a specific research function attached to it. So I've kind of listed those there. The empathize stage, you can think about this as qualitative inquiry. So students are active researchers. They need to go out and interview people. So let's say that they are critiquing an existing app. And for example, in the Intel module, the example they give you is Airbnb. So students would go out and interview users or the community or people. How do you interact with Airbnb? What is good about that experience? What is bad about that experience? So an example could be something like, you could ask students, when did ChatGPT give you an unhelpful answer? They could then interview other students in the class about this as this form of kind of qualitative inquiry. So what you're trying to do is collect information about lived experiences before you get to your hypothesis or your solution. The next stage is to take that and transform what you are hearing from your community into a research question. So the example I'm going to be using is AI grading systems. So let's say that based on a conversation my students have had with each other in class, they have identified that they have a real problem with their instructor using AI to grade their assignments. And so we want to reframe that as a research question. How might we make AI grading more transparent and fair for students? And this is now the question that they need to be addressing through their design thinking methodology. And basically what we will have after that conversation is we'll have a lot of what we call that messy empathy data, right? Lots of questions, lots of concerns, and we want to reframe that into the how might we format. And that's going to keep it open-ended, keep students in that sort of brainstorming mentality. From there, we move into the ideate phase. So we have this defined problem now, And there are multiple possible ways that we could design or address this problem. And at this stage, we still want to keep things really, really open-ended. And so I like to run an activity which is related to design thinking. It's called Crazy Eights. And essentially what happens is you get a piece of paper, you fold it into 8 parts, and you set a timer for 5 minutes. And you give them the research question. So how might we make AI grading more fair? And they have to come up with 8 ideas within, say, 5 to 8 minutes. They hate this activity because it puts them on the spot and they have to be really creative on a timer. And especially when it comes to artists and the students that I'm dealing with, they hate being creative under pressure. But what you're teaching them is that at this stage, there's no such thing as a bad idea. What we're trying to do is generate as many different possible ideas or outcomes as possible. It's kind of like when we draft an essay, right? It's easier to edit something on the page than just stare at a blank canvas. And so we want them to just kind of come out with things. So let's say that we're sticking with this question of how do we make AI grading more fair, right? This is where students can start to kind of ask those what if questions. Well, what if we compare the tone and language of human feedback versus AI feedback? What if we prototype something that explains to us what's happening? What if we collect more data from both students and faculty members to get, we need more information, we need more perspective. So again, a really open-ended ideation approach. By the time we get to prototyping, we're taking that, and again, we're sticking with the idea that this is all very open, and we're moving into testing some ideas quickly. So this could be, let's say, they feel that they need more information about how AI grading actually works. Great, let's do a really quick paper prototype or mock-up of a web page. Let's do a really quick mock-up or wireframe of an application. They don't have to know how to build it. And that's really, really key. Neither you or they need the technical skills necessarily yet to build this thing. But what you're doing is encouraging them to critically analyze how these systems operate and work. So we want to help students test these small ideas really quickly rather than waiting for something that is perfect. And prototypes are meant to fail, and they're meant to teach us, and it's meant to be iterative. Really crucial then is this last stage where we want to test that in the real world. So we take our prototype and we want to then take it back to often the original community that we've interviewed. And we want to test it. And this is where those ethical considerations become really, really critical. So who is left out of the application that we have developed? Who is not feeling represented? Are there gaps in usability of this product that we've come up with or this solution that we've come up with? And so these are where we can really ask students, how are they going to test for things like bias or usability or ethics in this prototype they've developed? And so this is the point where we're really getting them to kind of engage in that level of critical thinking. This is also where we showcase how important it is to iterate, because based on this feedback, they might want to go back to step 1, or they might want to go back to the ideation phase, or they might want to revisit their prototype phase. And so it teaches them that research is this thing that is cyclical and it builds. And if we're going to build ethical AI systems in particular, we need to constantly be revisiting the technical background and these processes. So it can kind of look like this as a model where it's this sort of endless cycle. And I think it's important to note that we're not replacing rigor. We're really just sort of expanding it so that we're adding reflection and ethics and empathy as this really, really critical part of what our research does out in the world itself. So an example assignment might look something like this. We're going to ask students to identify a challenge in their community that AI might be able to solve. So is that the Jackson water crisis? Is that, whatever it is? And then what they can do is apply these 5 stages of design thinking, go out and interview people, take notes, develop research questions, and then ideate some possible solutions. Is there a chatbot that they need to build that provides people with better information about water access? Then they could prototype that using generative AI to spin up a prototype, and then take that out into the real world and gather feedback and develop ethical applications. So this is where we're taking students from being consumers, I think, of what generative AI is just giving out as an output, and turning them into creators. They're developing something that is real, that is tangible, that they can collect feedback on. So I know I'm talking a lot, and I want to discuss and have questions, but Intel Module 13 of the AI Sandbox, and we'll take an actual look at it. It's really good. It introduces the 5 stages. So it really clearly tells students, here are the 5 stages of design thinking. It focuses a lot on AI solution development, not so much on the research and ethics per se. So that's an opportunity for us to push it further. Its examples are things like Airbnb, and it uses that to show students how understanding someone's needs, or consumers' needs, a user's needs, can lead to more successful innovation or products. So it's a really good introductory structure for teaching design thinking, and it helps students learn how to frame problems and gather data and iterate in a way that's really structured and methodological. What I think we can do to push it further is teach design thinking in a way where we're conveying that this is inquiry-driven methodology at the university level, and we can come up with some examples that are perhaps more relevant to our specific community, so that students feel like they have a level of agency and buy-in. They don't just have to critique existing systems, they can actually think about what systems they themselves could be building. So I have this kind of here's what the Intel module does on one side, and here is where we can push it further. So the Intel module really focuses on it as this kind of innovation process. I think it can also be an inquiry framework to develop critical thinking. We can investigate real world problems. We can get them to go out and do some of these activities and really frame this as a research methodology, and enable them to kind of build things. So I'm going to pause there for 2 minutes and come out of my slideshow here and head on over to the actual Intel module over here. Okay, so this is what the module looks like. There is a facilitator script. And so this actually provides you with a guide for how to run this session. And you'll see here that they recommend 240 minutes, 2 facilitators, 40 students. That might not be applicable for what you're doing in your classroom. So we have to figure out how to adapt that as well. The facilitator script gives you some ideas for the lesson overview, and you'll see that initially it's focusing on what is design thinking, and then how does that apply to AI. The module also includes a slide deck, which is fantastic. So you can really kind of walk through, again, what is design thinking, what does it mean for AI, and then here's a group activity where we will analyze something like Airbnb as a system. So it starts by introducing this. And so this is all there and available for you to download and use. And they also have a template for this group activity where students will analyze users and their needs of this application. To push this further, this is our AI Infusion Canvas shell. And so that we can start to think about how to encourage students to apply this to real world problems in our community, if you go down to link to overview of topics and cases, I've created a kind of like supplementary page. So we have the Intel module, and then we also have these resources that we can use. So there is a slide deck that walks them through this activity, which you could do, say, in one class, or you could make as part of an assignment. And it asks them this question: what is the AI problem or system that is impacting your specific community? And it doesn't have to be an AI problem. It could be a problem that AI can solve. And then I have different worksheets based on the different stages that you are able to download and use. The Intel PowerPoint you cannot edit. So we sign an agreement where you can't edit that content. You can use it in the class and that's fine, but you can't go in and make changes. This PowerPoint you can. So this is, again, something you could add on at the end and you could edit, and that's fine. And the same with all of these worksheet materials. So this is a kind of example of maybe what the in-class project or assignment or brief would be. And then I have also these ideas. And so these are different ideas that we use in design thinking or user experience design to encourage students to brainstorm and come up with solutions. And often it's the hardest part is getting students to enter into that space of open brainstorming to solutions, because they're so worried about having the right answer and coming up with a good solution immediately to the problem. And so getting them to really think about how to expand, and just be open to different possibilities and what that could look like is the real challenge. So I'm going to stop there for a minute. And what I would really like to do is to have a discussion about the ways in which this might be applicable in our classrooms. An example that comes to mind for me immediately is you could ask students to brainstorm and ideate solutions to the ways in which AI is impacting your discipline. That would be one example. Or how is it impacting their education? But in some ways, what I'd like to do is kind of guide us through this exercise. And I'm curious if you can think about perhaps a problem or an existing system that is impacting your community, whether that's our academic community or our lived environment, that you would be interested in students investigating and building a prototype for. I can also show us some tools for prototyping, but before we get there, I think let's just have a chat about how this might be applicable in our classrooms. So I would love to hear your thoughts or any questions about the design thinking process.
Sorry, I was trying to unmute and I forgot which device I was on there for a second. As an English professor, I always find myself challenged to translate what we're doing and what we're teaching our students, the critical thinking, the writing, into real world problems that aren't specifically education based. But one thing that I think, just in our discipline overall, is that students love reading, hopefully, and they love to write, and they are interested in expression, but they don't really know what they want to do with their English degree. And so one of the things I was thinking about was, how do we help students explore that? How can they use AI to help themselves explore that? Because while I have some experience outside of academia as a grant writer and a project planner, that's it. There are dozens and dozens of other things that they can do. So I was thinking of that in that way. And I don't know if other people um, have that similar challenge of, like, how do you translate what your academic discipline is into something real world?
I think
Well,
that's a great example.
one of the thing which I struggle is that let's say if you're looking at a literature review, and then students tend to now go and then find it, and most not I mean very often, but you have a chance of finding false review over there. Besides that, I had to struggle that how would their own intellectual prowess now will be look at when they have all these facilities available. How would you manage that process? And how would you first to differentiate? For example, let's look into the the manuscript review or the grants review. You can put all that into now chat GPT, and all of a sudden it will give you a feedback. Now, those who have been working on manuscript or those who've been working on grants, which spend a month, and here you got your response all of a sudden, uh, that's not fair to them. So I'm trying to struggle on on those questions because I had been through those and I wanted to make sure that everybody get their fair fair share back. So how would we manage that part? That's bothering me a lot.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense too. That's actually such a good example because I think both of those are, and this activity asks either pick something that you could develop or critique something that exists. And so we have both of those things. So we could develop something that helps Dr. Pizzetta address students gaining more insight into careers in English. We can actually prototype something for that. And Dr. Ahmad, we can look at this existing system that is ChatGPT, and we can ask students or researchers or faculty to think really critically about how it's being used within this context and how can we mitigate that and what solutions can we come up with. And that's more critiquing something that's already out there in the world and that kind of exists. So let me start with the career information one, and then we'll get to the literature review one, if that makes sense, and we'll kind of do it in that order, if that's okay. So for the career information one, what that might look like, for example, now let's pretend Dr. Pizzetta is the student in the English class who is tasked with addressing this topic. And so the first step in empathize would be you would interview. I mean, you would go out and you would seek people, real people who were perhaps working across different fields with an English degree. And you would gather that data. That would be step one. I think you've already framed this as a how might we question. And the how might we question was how might we better articulate to our students what the potentials are, across different careers with an English degree. And we can say that better. And so let's say that we do our ideation session and we decide that we want to build an app. And it's an app where students can go and immediately ask this bot or this chat bot for ideas for how they could give the bot information about who they are, their background, what they're interested in, and it would come up for ideas for different career paths in English. So let's say we were doing that in class. The best tool that I have to be able to do that quickly and prototype something in a way that's relatively safe for students is Poe. So Poe lets you create chatbots, but Poe has a new feature that actually lets you create and prototype an app just using generative AI. And so again, you don't have to know how to code, your students don't have to know how to code. So we go to poe.com and we click create, and there's a new feature here called Canvas app. And it will say, do you want to generate this with a bot or build it manually? We're going to click generate with a bot. And then we're going to tell it what we want. So we'll say create, why can't I type in here? Well, this is my Trinket AI is. Oh, it won't let me type. Okay. How am I going to solve this? Let me go to another browser here. Just 1 second. Okay, here we go. This shouldn't be a problem here. Okay, so I go create Canvas app, generate with a bot, create an app that guides the user through different career opportunities with an English degree, bachelor's level. Now we would have done a lot of background information. We may even be able to tell this bot things about the specific concerns that we have. So Dr. Pizzetta, is there anything that we should add to this prompt that you can think of that would let us better prototype what this is? What are some specific concerns?
I keep forgetting. So one thing is that they need to think about what their specific skills are and their interests are, because an English degree is just sort of like just saying that is just sort of this flat, bland thing. But they could be really good at creativity. They could be good at organizational thinking. They could be good at problem solving or research, or like help them identify what their skills they think their skills are and their interests, in order to really better aim at what they want to do.
Great. So that might take the form of, say, like a quiz or something that the app asks them to do. So let's see if we can kind of add that in. And you would also have a data set, because you would have gone and spoken to a range of different people, and you would have these different options. The data set that we're going to be pulling from is just going to be probably ChatGPT in the background, pulling through things. So here's my app creator saying, okay, wants me to create an app that guides students through different career opportunities, identify skills. This is a great use case for a web application. And you can see it here writing the code in real time. And this is going to take a minute. This is not necessarily something that is going to translate to then immediately being deployed. It's also not something that is necessarily going to be FERPA compliant, for example. But those are great things to talk to students about, to get them to start thinking critically about this. So your prototype is just that. It's just a prototype. When they get to that feedback stage is where they could say, well, now that I've created my prototype, here are the concerns that I would have before this could actually go out and be utilized by the community that I'm aiming to address. So this is going to take a little while in the background. Has anyone built an app using this method before? I'm really curious. Have we seen this happen? Okay. There's po.com is really great for text to app. Canva, for those of you who have a premium Canva account, will also build apps. There are a lot of text to app generators out there. For those of you who may have more experience in computer science, the nice thing about these is that they will let you access the HTML. And so you can actually copy and download that and then edit it. And so for our students in computer science, this is kind of amazing, because this is what we call vibe coding. And so if they know enough about the language that's being used, they can then go in and edit it. Okay, so here's our app that we have created. Welcome, future professional. And we didn't tell it anything about how it should communicate with students. So all of those things would be part of your ideation and your research phase. So start career assessment. Okay. So Dr. Pazetta, take the quiz. When working on a group project, do you prefer to take charge, generate creative ideas, research, or ensure clear communication?
Generate creative ideas.
Okay, great.
Persuasive essays. Okay, we may just have to randomly choose things. I'm such a slow reader. I'm sorry.
Or like 20 of these. So let's see what happens. I'm just going to sort of pick. Let's see whatever is going here. So it's a pretty comprehensive quiz that it has developed.
Yes, it is.
With 20
questions. That's good.
And I'm seeing a kind of pattern in terms of what C is. So we're going to kind of run with that. Okay, so here it's built you a skills profile. So it's telling you these things, and then it's giving you some recommended career paths. It's saying you've matched with these specifically. So you can then retake the assessment. This is working on po.com's API. So you can publish this. It can be a link that they then share with people. Other people can then interact with this app that they've built. You can't just sort of take the HTML or the code behind there and put it on your own website and deploy it without connecting it to Po's API, because that's what it's drawing from. But you can publish and share this link. And so again, as a prototype, pretty cool to be able to test this out in this way. But then what we'll do is we'll really, now that we've built this app, the next step is to really ask students to critique it. And so that would be that peer review reflection card where they would send it to a classmate. And my reaction as a classmate would be, for example, this is amazing, but maybe I don't really understand, like, what do you mean by analytical thinking? I need a description. And so I, as the user, would be providing feedback on how to make this better. And these would all be informed again by your interviews. But I hope that's a useful application. And again, this is free and available to students. They can just log in with their Jackson State email, and it's a really quick way for them to see something come to life.
Yeah,
so I hope it's useful.
Yeah.
Cool. So Dr. Ahmad, now how do we, let's come back to this question of the literature review. So tell me one more time about the problem, and let's think about our existing AI systems and how we would talk to students about it.
Let's say we are working on the post-COVID understanding of Mississippi response to vaccination.
Okay.
And see what's going on. And let's say we want to understand in depth how our communities and how our counties responded to that. Is there any current publication available?
Right. So what students will increasingly probably be using is this feature called, let me make sure I'm sharing the right screen here. This feature called deep research, which we may be familiar with in ChatGPT. And so if they have a premium account, what they'll be using most likely for a question like that will be ChatGPT's deep research. So we could ask something like, is there comparative data post COVID for how Mississippi counties are responding to vaccinations? Do you mean in terms of their perception of vaccination, or how they're literally?
First of all, actually, whether have they been inoculated?
Okay.
And then, of course, but we can also look into perception, but we are more concerned about the actual availability of the data.
Okay, great. And that's a really good question, right? Is this data available? I think that this is a great exercise to actually get students to do, because what it will potentially reveal is gaps in the training data of the AI, not whether the data is available or not, but so are we interested in, so I'll just say yes, we want all of that. Okay, so it's going to try to gather comparative post-COVID vaccination data from Mississippi counties and breakdowns. Now, the challenge, which I'm sure we're all aware of with this, deep research is good in the sense that it will actually be looking for this source material and it will be trying to corroborate it. That doesn't always mean it's correct, though. And an example I have of that is I was doing something related to Jackson State University with a class and showing them the deep research function. And it was pulling information from Jacksonville State University. And it was adamant that these sources were related to what I had asked it for. And that's what we call that hallucination, where it is kind of filling in the gap. Now, the source was a real source, but it was a real source about something we hadn't asked it for. And so as a result, when it amalgamated that literature review together, you have incorrect information. What I like to do as well is look at this activity, because it kind of gives you this insight in terms of how the system is approaching searching for the information. And it could be really interesting to ask students to compare the way that this is going about trying to find these sources with the way that they might research sources for a literature review. And so it's struggling right now to find this information.
Because there is hardly one.
Right, right.
Especially at Mississippi counties level. We tried that. It is very difficult, and then Mississippi Department of Health is unfortunately not very good in posting their information on the web. So we struggle in the past trying to
Yeah.
access them and try to reach to Mississippi Department of Health compared to other Department of Health. So and maybe one of the reasons that there's not enough published data on Mississippi's per
Yeah.
se. Although
Yeah.
you can go through CDC, you can go through other sources.
And it's trying, but actually setting them this problem could be setting them a problem where the data doesn't exist and asking them to look at what it returns so that they can critique the system could be really interesting. um, the other thing I'm thinking about is, okay, this information doesn't exist on a statewide level, but could your students use that design thinking methodology to do a research project on Jackson State University or Jackson, the larger Jackson area, and perhaps conduct some interviews, collect data, build something like a dashboard with Poe.com creating this app that's a dashboard that demonstrates perhaps statistics, at Jackson State who's inoculated, what are some perceptions, reasons for or against inoculation. All of those things could be explored and quantified through a research project that could then get larger and larger. So that could be an option too.
We can, but the problem with that approach is whenever you have those human subject involved, you have to go through some very lengthy procedure
Yeah,
and
for the IRB.
permission. And for a 16-week class, it becomes extremely time prohibiting, and then there's a huge bottleneck. So we try to avoid those per se survey type of things in the class, because then you have to first of all time constraint and then
Yeah,
regulation constraint.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And that's why I think for some subject areas, and especially if you're dealing with things in the medical field, it may be easier to critique an existing thing that is out there than to collect the necessary data through IRB to build your own system. So that's definitely something to think of. And we can actually look at and confirm IRB rules about classroom participation. So for example, Dr. Pizzetta, like your app that you're building, when IRB needs to be collected for that or not, for example. Okay, so while this is thinking, is anyone else having any ideas about potential applications or problems or prototypes that they would ask their students to explore in their class as like a research project?
Yeah. Hi, Britt. This is
Hello.
Shante. I have something, my big concern in the history department. Of course, we do the research and being a public historian, I am on one hand encouraging students to be creative with the history and apply it to something like a historic marker or a museum and that sort of thing. But found fundamentally, my concern is whether or not there is an integrity test or honesty test or something that's gonna advise or better inform the students around being original or around not using ChatGPT to the extent that it gives them the idea, or how do we encourage our students to write their own and or reflect somehow deeply on what they would like to do and have ChatGPT more or less edit as opposed to create ideas and concepts, based on the historical whatever out there. Do you understand what I'm saying? I'm really
Yeah.
students to do the writing first. And how
Yeah.
do we encourage them to use this AI generated information that helps them to develop their concepts and ideas as opposed to create and drive their creative ideas and thinking?
Yeah. No, that makes total sense. And I think that it's one of the reasons I like the design thinking methodology to do it in the classroom with pen and paper. And so before they go and put something into like their app creator with Poe, or before they get to ChatGPT, we've played games like Crazy Eights where they've had to ideate multiple different ideas. And so, for example, if it's something like, let's say you're sitting an assignment, I do one where it's like it's a virtual museum exhibit that they have to come up with. And really what they're doing is writing a research essay through thinking through a theme and thematic analysis of works of art. But they're doing it in a way that is, there's like a product at the end. And so I think that having them talk to each other about their ideas and then ideate them on paper and brainstorm through these really structured activities, and there are a bunch of different activities that they can do that, means that they first have to come up with that idea and they're not going to ChatGPT. And then it's about teaching them how to hone in on that. So design thinking really does stress the ideation stage, and the feedback stage and the reflection stage, probably more so than the product itself, because it reduces the product, well, not reduces it, but it emphasizes that the product is the prototype and that product is going to shift and change, and that they have to center humans in the process of creating it. So I don't know if that answers your question, but for me, it's actually been really, really helpful as a methodology to address exactly that, and to make sure that students are coming up with their own idea first, that's grounded in people, not a ChatGPT search, if that makes sense.
Excuse me, it does make sense, I guess, but again, I'm more concerned about students not thinking anymore, right? So they don't have to think anymore. I mean, really. And then to be honest about whether or not, is this your work? Is there some sort of a test, like an honesty or integrity test that you might take to get a job? But in sitting in the classrooms and working on projects, and to be honest about whether or not this is actually your work is a challenge. And then you don't want to insult the intelligence of students, because many are, of course, very, very smart, and many are not, and use this tool instead of developing their own brain cells. That's my concern. How do we really advise and counsel and guide them into the understanding that they must think without this machine first and not rely so heavily, because, you know, anything
Yeah.
these electronics, they are investing in their own education and their ability to think and create and write on their own, and perhaps use this as a tool for developing those skills.
Yeah, and I agree with you, Sade, but I do think that this is kind of the challenge for us, and I like the design thinking idea because it is about not just teaching them how to use a particular process, but engaging them in the critical analysis of the information they're getting back. So like embedding that, making them use it, but making them use it in a way where they are critiquing what they get. And that the critique becomes kind of part of what you're assessing them on. Are you really looking at it? Because you're right, we can't control what they're doing outside the physical classroom. But I do think I can definitely see, the more I sit here thinking about the different ways that I might engage students in planning and thinking in the classroom, and then encouraging them to bring back what they've built or what they've explored, and let's talk about how that actually looks. It's very challenging.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It's almost like we, well, in my department anyway, with writing and researching, it's almost like making another step, or creating another step where they have to show their work or something, like a math problem. How did you get here? You know, how did you develop this end result Where are your drafts, perhaps?
Yeah, yeah. And actually some of the worksheets could be thought of in that way. Like they have to show their work, they have to show that they talked to another human being. They have to show that they compared things. I think also, if we go back to the app that it created, they will see that what the AI gives them is not perfect and doesn't actually address what it needs to. And so if all they did was go to this and say, I want to see this thing, without fully interrogating what that community of real people needed, that the end result will not be anywhere near as good as if they were involved in the process. And so somehow encouraging them to have ownership or be able to exercise agency within these systems, I think is maybe one way forward, but I definitely don't have the answers. And so I'm still battling with this, but getting students excited to build things and be able to take ownership of things and then care about whether they work or not, or whether they were involved in the process or not, I think is one way to think about it, and it's important. But I don't know the answer, and I think we're all struggling with it for sure. This is still researching these inoculation rates, so it's still going. It might get there. It has found 25 sources, but whether they tell us anything is another question. So I actually think this was a good example. But yes, I think design thinking is good for encouraging students to come up with questions themselves. And I think that is something that we're going to have to lean into and teach more to sort of address that question. I don't know if anyone else has any ideas about how to approach that bigger question.
It does seem like it's more at this point that there isn't, sir, there's kind of for your discipline and what you're trying to get your students to do, you have to think about, where is AI influencing what's happening, and how do we have to do our own design thinking. How do I redesign the learning process in this course to incorporate AI that they're going to use anyway into their learning in a way that doesn't do what Sade was talking about, doesn't take over, doesn't replace their own thinking.
I was talking to my grad class the other day, and then if you look into the 30 years evolutionary process I've been through, about 30 years ago, when we started the data analysis, it took us almost 3 months to have maybe 3,000 data points. And then if you look into literature review, it takes another month or so. We have removed all those constraints now. The data analysis can be done now in 5 minutes. The lit review can be done now in half an hour. It has relieved us a huge amount of time. But the challenge now, are we using or utilizing that time to innovate? I think that is the major challenge now. We can do all these sort of things right up. For example, all of those who come from other countries, we had to struggle English as a second language, especially in writing. Now with Grammarly and everything, it become very easy. But have we been utilizing the time which we have spared now to innovate? I think that's a major challenge now in terms of putting that efforts in, or we become more complacent actually. Now you can do the same thing at the very last minute because you know. So I think that what we were discussing in our classroom at a graduate level, how could you actually efficiently utilize the time you have gained over the years into more productive way of making things in an upward direction?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think that that's a really, really big question. And hopefully one again that this kind of design thinking process it is really about exploring innovation. I think that's right. The other thing I think that made me think of in relation to literature reviews that's interesting is that it is still pulling information that it has access to. And so when we're doing literature reviews, one thing you could get perhaps a graduate level seminar to really investigate and critique as a system is who is left out. And you mentioned, for example, scholars from other countries. Like I would imagine that the literature reviews that ChatGPT is coming up with are very Eurocentric, probably very grounded in like US scholarship. It's certainly not drawing on things that are behind paywalls. It doesn't tend to read and analyze books, even if they are on Google Books and available. And so a really good question, you know, could be, are we going to see a sort of rollback on the diversity of scholarship that we've all been trained to investigate and target? And it's not, you know, we're going to see the same information coming up in these literature reviews. That could be something for a graduate seminar to really interrogate and would be really important. Here is your information on.
Yeah, I see that. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's interesting. And whether, you know, the other question is, has it correctly interpreted the sources and the data? You would need to go back and probably double check. But this is, you know, some interesting information. Certainly an assignment that I think a graduate level student could really dive into and critique what has come back. Yeah.
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 You'll have to send it to Dr. Ahmad and
I
see
will.
if he can identify the errors in it quickly.
Yeah, we publish our own paper on this one. I was wondering if it has included that one.
Yeah, I'll share it with you. I'll send it to you.
Well, we are out of time. I really appreciate everyone being here, and Dr. Myburgh and Dr. Turnipseed and Dr. Ahmad, everyone for participating. This recording and all of the information related to it will be on the website probably later today. And if you have colleagues who couldn't come and were sending their Otter AI, they should also know. We'll let them know that the recording is there. If you're interested in having access to the AI infusion course, I will drop the link in the chat one more time. If you have any trouble with it, just let us know and just send me an email and I'll walk you through whatever the process is. We will be having another kind of our next step in the AI on-ramp sometime, hopefully before the fall is over. We're trying to get that scheduled. And if you are trying things with AI and you really felt like you did an assignment with your students that helped open their eyes, helped them see that there are limits to what it can do and how it might hamper them, share that with us. Let us know. You can have your own session. We want to know what you're doing. This is how, because this is new for everyone. And we're all learning how to do it. Even our AI whiz kid said a little while ago, she doesn't know everything. She doesn't have all the answers. None of us have all the answers. So as you are finding solutions, even if they're small solutions, I'd love to have a panel later in the spring with people who've tried things in their classes that you want to share. So please let us know. Thank you all again for joining us on this Thursday that feels like a Friday. And I hope you all have a great day. We will see you next week. Dr. Ahmad will be talking to us about turning graduate course research into publishable research. So that is going to be great. If you are a graduate faculty, please come. See you next week.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.